Well, we've just been having a great time laughing. I'm like wiping the little tears out of my eyes, laughing at myself, really, and all of my idiosyncrasies about recording shows. So thank you, Chantal, for sitting with me and learning all about those things prior to getting started here today. So welcome, and thank you so much for volunteering your time out of your very busy schedule to sit with us today and have a casual conversation. I've been calling these like the fireside chats. However, there's no fire beside either of us. But we wish there was one, because we were just talking about how freezing it is, and how you used to live in Bermuda, and you're wondering about the weather change in your lifestyle, right? So thanks again for being here. This is the power of Atlantic female leadership. And today we're going to be speaking with Chantal Brine, who has such an incredible background, incredible bio, so much experience. And I'm really excited to hear what you're going to share with us today. So what I want to share with you about Chantal is that she is a people builder. She's also a business builder, and has come to us, has been studying, psychology, human interaction, and business, HR. Previously, you'd been living in Bermuda, which is such a beautiful place. I spent some time there myself, and returned to Nova Scotia and made Atlantic Canada your home. You are a thought leader and really focused on living with purpose. And this is such a topic that I'm so interested in about for myself and for the women that are going to be listening. I think that's the big question that they're asking themselves. So you follow a simple and powerful mantra while pursuing what makes you happy, that life is too short to do something that you are not passionate about. Amen to that. And so in 2018, you founded your own startup, On Point, and your goal was to help 1 million individuals through the power of mentorship. And so for those of you who are learning about On Point for the first time, On Point helps organizations create and maintain high impact mentorship programs with consultations and through their online mentorship platform. So welcome to the show. I know you've got a lot of insight and a lot of experience to share with us. So thank you so much for being here, Chantal.
Thank you for having me, Harriet. It's always a joy and a pleasure, and these conversations reinvigorate. They're important to have because they cause you to pause, remember, for me, my own purpose and why I do what I do, which, let's face it, in the run of a day or a week, sometimes doesn't happen, often doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day and forget to swim up and look out, which I think is a question that a lot of women are asking themselves right now is, what am I doing and why am I doing this? And is this it? And what should I be doing? And so where should we begin our conversation today?
I think right there.
Okay, let's do it.
100%.
All right.
And I think, I'll share. So you just read as part of my bio, my belief that life is too short to do work that you don't connect to. That has been something that I have felt so strongly from such a young age. And, it came from watching, my parents, who are both entrepreneurs. I didn't know that was what they were. I didn't know that was the label. My dad is a carpenter and has his own business, creating beautifully sculpted things for clients. My mother is more of what you consider like that entrepreneur, if you want to consider it that way, working in real estate. But it's her book of business, right? So I saw them working and enjoying their work most of the time. Let's face it, there are always days for all of us where it's not always going to be rosy, right? So I saw that growing up, and yet would hear, and I remember this vivid moments of, people on radio shows even, or in conversations. Oh, it's Monday. Oh, I can't wait for Friday. And it just never felt right to me, because it just felt like we were wishing life away. And so that has always been something that was inside of me and observing from a very young age. And so in 2015, I was working with an organization, and I was doing everything under the sun of people. So that included the recruiting, the hiring, the performance management supports, and ultimately walking them out the door when the timing was no longer right, and or when the organization downsized. And because it was a relatively, I like to tell people it was a mature seeming company, but we were still a startup, right? In terms of the business model and how we were running and trying to figure things out. So there was it was constant change. So managing people's emotions and constant change, and doing a whole variety of other things. Those other things were not what I was passionate about.
Right.
And what I realized was, I was the one, Harriet, who had to have conversations with people when we did downsize the organization. We grew it from 30 when I first started with them to around 120 full-time or part-time staff, and then up to 500 with contract staff across North America. And I recruited a number of these people. So when we had to downsize, I was with these people in their career journeys for, a good stretch of time, and then had to tell them, hey, this is coming to an end. And how that was happening, there were a series of moments for myself that were the aha for me. I was felt that I had to fight to treat people with dignity in this. And what became evident was that there was just not an alignment between the leadership values and my values. And I think that is a really important indicator for any of us. The minute we feel we can't show up, whatever the environment, as who we are most of the time, I don't know. I don't, and that's not true. I do know. I'm not about that.
Yeah.
Like, that just feels like a waste of talent, a waste of a life, a waste of potential. And I'm not saying that because, you have the luxury of up and quitting today. We all have financial obligations and things that we need to maintain. However, I remember even myself going through it once I realized I had this aha moment. I was like, okay, this is not it anymore. I didn't know what it was going to be, what the next step was going to be. But the sense of like, okay, can I make this move? Like I'm making a good salary. Like I've been having great leadership opportunities, new challenges. So there were some pluses, but those pluses were not enough for the disconnect between the values of the organization, what I believed and felt the values of what the organization were, and mine. It was too much of a conflict that could not be resolved, and I couldn't control it. So what I could control was leaving. And ultimately that decision is what led to a couple of years later, starting On Point. And it was with the support of a mentor that helped along that journey. Right. But for me, I picked up on that thread because so much of what we do here at On Point and the ethos for why we exist, Harriet, is because I truly believe that life is just too short to not do work that you can bring your whole self to, that you are excited about most of the time, because you're going to work harder, you're going to work better, you're going to create better results, not just for that company, that department, but it trickles out and down into family and community, and then role models for generations to come. So how can we help people navigate that many times in our career? Because it's not just a one and done thing. Careers are not linear. We have lots of inflection points where we can choose multiple paths, but how do you choose that path? Are you doing it from a place of coming inwards and then going outwards? Or are you being driven by external forces and fears? And look, we're all human. But I think we make better decisions for ourselves when we can be really clear about who we are, what's important for us, what's non-negotiable, what energizes us, what drains us. And so we've actually built, it's one of our little, it's not really a secret. So most of our clients are familiar with it, but definitely not outside of our clients. we have a really simple model that we've been using with organizations and the mentees in particular to help kind of just surface some of these things. We call it our career Kickstarter. It's not complicated. It truly is just to provide an opportunity to pause, to dream. We talk about magic wands in the first step so that we're getting people trying to kind of suspend disbelief for a little period of time at least. And then we try and get really practical really quick, Harriet, in terms of, okay, once I've kind of oriented to what I would ideally like to have as my next step, and I understand what's non-negotiable in that, now how do I start to go outwards and build networks and communities and relationships that bring more information in, but you're always funneling it through your target, your lens. So those advisors are coming in, you're deciding what advice you keep and what advice you say no thank you to, right? So I love actually seeing that people are taking the time to be beautifully selfish and saying, what do I want in this thing called a career, which is like 70 to 80% of our lives, for crying out loud. Right. And the circumstances under which that has happened in terms of COVID and the great reflection, great resignation, and what we're seeing out of that, and the social movements over the last couple of years, that is not great. But that it has at least been a catalyst for what I think will be positive change. Okay, we'll take that as a little bit of a win, right?
Yeah, it's been interesting to me seeing how things sort of expand and contract and expand and contract. And what I've been seeing as well is this tension that we're constantly grappling with. And that's what I'm hearing you talk about right now, is this tension between safety versus purpose. And when I heard you say, you were asking yourself that question, like, can I afford to do this? Like, can I make this change? I think there's a lot of people who are asking themselves that question because I have bills to pay. The interest rates are going, like, everything's gotten more expensive. Can I afford to make this change? And the other question is, can you afford not to? So it's really about asking because safety is a really important thing. Like, it's a big driver of why we stay where we are and why we don't necessarily want to take on the risk. And what I feel like we have experienced is a bit of a purpose or a vision deficit because of this intense narrative around safety over the past couple of years, where we have been feeling a world that feels very unsafe. And so I think there's no better time right now. And that's what I think is kind of happening in the marketplace, is that people are like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't necessarily have the answer, but I know that it's not this. And so how do you, we were talking a bit about a process here of like figuring it out, because I think that that's sometimes the biggest hurdle, because the searching is painful. It can be hard to like not have the answer, but just know that this isn't what you want. And so you've mentioned, dreaming and pausing and taking time out to reflect. So what else are you seeing as kind of some of the steps? If, there are probably a lot of people who are going to be listening to this who are going to be saying, yeah, this is me. I know that I want to make a change, but I don't know how or what to do.
Yeah, and that truly, Harriet, is why we have chosen mentorship as the vehicle to help people build, start, and continue to progress in meaningful careers. There is career development toolkits. There's a lot of tools. That's the great news. We have intentionally put our money, if you want to think about it that way, behind mentorship because of a couple of things. One, my own very personal story and connection to it. I credit being able to start on point because of a very transformative mentorship relationship that happened in that period of time when I was trying to figure out what was next. So talk about that too. But the other thing, when we start to look at mentorship and female leadership in particular, there have been studies upon studies that have proven that the percentage of women that want mentorship, they want guidance to help navigate either in a company or out of a company, right? Or, to figure out what the next step is significantly higher than the percentage that have mentors. There's a thread there, which is we don't ask for help all the time. And we sometimes don't believe we deserve help, which is not just women, but I think there are some threads there around femininity that some narratives that we are still working, I think, to overcome. There are studies that also show that within organizations, female identifying individuals who have mentors progress within the organization at quicker rates than those who do not, as well as they are retained within the organization. And you could start to parse apart that, and we can make some assumptions around why that is. Part of that is I feel my organization's valuing me and investing in my own career success. Of course, that would endear me to an organization. Of course, right? And so there is tangible impacts that mentorship can have in terms of helping individuals either start, restart, or build and progress within career. And for me, it all comes down to having somebody who is a little bit more seasoned in a particular thing. So it could be a domain or an industry that you're curious about. Maybe it's something you've always had wouldn't it be fun to do this? Or I would love to own a restaurant one day. Part of the reflection that we ask people to do and why we say dream is because we want people to tap into that energy and that headspace of park all of reality right now for at least step one, and actually just ask yourself some questions around if you could truly do anything, you could design this next step from top to bottom. Who would you work with? What are the characteristics of that team, of the leadership? If you envision that you want to be a leader, what are the characteristics that you want to be known for? If you envision an environment, what does that environment look like? Is it in an office? Is it traveling? Is it remote? Is it hybrid? How does the organization do the work? Start to pull apart the culture of the organization. And it's all through the lens, Harriet, of like, where do you thrive? And what conditions do you do your best work, where you show up authentically as you most of the time, and you're actually energized most of the time. And so it's all within that space that we get people to start. But then the next step is, as I talked about, it's going out a little bit, because if you just stay in your own head, that's where the safety and the security and all of the am I insane to even be thinking about this? Like all of those things start to pop up, right? So my hope is for everybody who's listening, if you are in that space of, where you don't want to be anymore, but you're not quite sure where you want to run to. And that's something we hope for all of the folks that, when I talk about this, my hope is that people don't run away from things, but rather they are running towards something with open arms. And that does take work. It does take time. The beautiful thing is you don't need to do it on your own. Mentorship is one of many forms within organizations. Perhaps there actually is a sponsorship program that you could use to help you navigate within that organization, if that's what lines up with what your dreaming is. There's also peer-to-peer groups, like the Universal Women's Network, like She Corporated, like Volta's Women Taking Over the World with Tech for anybody in tech, like Women in Communications and Technology. There's a whole host of networks that can rally behind you, but you need to take the step. Either it's one-on-one or within a group of some kind to say, here's who I am. Here's what I'm like, here's kind of what I'm contemplating for. Here's what I might be looking for some support in a way that doesn't put you at risk if you're still within current company, right? Because you can do that. But then invites the people who connect to what you're putting out there to say, hey, yeah, 100%. I've been through that too. I'm happy to chat. Using other people to help you explore what the art of the possible is is
Yeah.
kind of step 2, but you have to have a plan for that, right? So you need to be, you're giving somebody enough insight and information into what you're trying to get closer of understanding towards, and you're asking for their feedback around that. And we're really clear that these are conversations around understanding somebody else's lived experience.
Yeah.
It's not judging it, trying to have a really open mind, understanding their lessons learned, their failures, the mistakes, the things that they wish they would have done differently, their wins, the aha moments, and then bringing all of those back into your own reflection, and consistently over a period of time, right? Which is why mentorship actually is a great tool for this, Harriet, because mentorship is not a transaction. It's a relationship,
Yeah.
and that you can progress in, that you've got some safety in the relationship. So I can tell you what I'm really worried about. It's not for everybody, and it's not the only tool out there. It is a very powerful tool. And if you are at all, open to experiencing that, again, there's a number of networks and opportunities out there. Or heck, if anybody's listening to this and wants to reach out to me, I am always game for these conversations, and to help make referrals or connections, because that's all it takes. The first step, I think, is actually just vocalizing, I'm not happy. I don't know where to go. I want help, right?
It's 100,000 times the first step. And I have seen that time and time again with the women that I've worked with, is that the first step is believing that you are worthy of having more, and that that's not a bad thing. Like, it's okay to want more for yourself and to actually vocalize that with other people, whatever that more is. For it's going to be different for everyone, but you get to define and determine how you measure success and what that looks like for you and what you want your life to look like. And in fact, like, feeling good is the whole point of all of this. So if you're not feeling good, it's probably a sign that something needs to shift. But I'm also a really big believer that nobody cares about your career as much as you do. So to sit around and kind of be passive, hoping that somebody else is going to notice and like tap you on the shoulder and help you figure it out, it's not going to happen, because everybody is like in their own stuff, right? And so absolutely, getting a network of support, it helps you to see, like, I think about my mentors in my life, and they helped me to see what was possible. Because they'd already walked the path. They were already steps ahead on the journey that I was curious about. I'm not going to do it the same way that they do it. I'm going to take pieces and I'm going to leave pieces. But it was like inspiring because it held up a vision of what is possible. I remember the best piece of advice that I got from my favorite mentor, and she really helped me to get into the field that I'm in right now. I credit her for so much of what I learned. And I remember having my first child, my first daughter, and I was just on my entrepreneurial journey. And I remember feeling like, oh, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to handle this? And I remember her saying to me, it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both. And it was like those kinds of moments, and you've talked about moments, right? It's like those moments where you're like, oh yeah, because I trust you and I see that you're doing both. Right. It's so, so valuable. So absolutely, definitely reaching out and knowing that you do not need to be alone. And we actually have more in common than we have difference. I'm sure you've seen that too through the relationships that you've developed over time.
100%. And you don't, I think one of the beautiful things about, and you mentioned trust, Harriet, that is so key. Like relationship. So for me to unlearn and learn, I need to, there has to be credibility. I have to believe the person that is that I'm talking to is invested in me, not in a particular outcome. To really be able to sit in this space of curiosity and pulling things apart to put them back together in a new way that is more aligned with who you are and what you want to be and do and exist in this world, right? Like that is the pinnacle. Like to have really meaningful conversations, you have to have that psychological safety. You have to believe that somebody is not going to go talk to somebody else in their network about a conversation. Right. Otherwise, you're not really, like, you can still get value, but you're not going to go maybe as deep and you're missing, I think, parts of some of the really like those little aha moments, as you just mentioned. They're the things that stick with you for years, right? And you pass them on, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And I wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for that moment. I would have probably, I mean, who knows? I don't have a crystal ball, but I can imagine that the path would have looked different.
Right.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about, being an entrepreneur, being a female founder, the landscape of that, because I know that a lot of women are, corporate women might be looking at what's going on inside their organization and thinking about going out and becoming an entrepreneur. We talked a little bit about entrepreneurial mindset. I think that is, something that we need in both spheres. Definitely corporate women need to have an entrepreneurial mindset if they're going to help their careers grow. But what's the view from where you sit, being a female founder, especially in the tech industry?
Yeah, and I never, growing up, university, after university, never would have thought that those words would ever be part of my vocabulary.
Rolling off your tongue and being interviewed about it one day. Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
that's the beauty of career journeys. Like
Yeah,
there's more possibility actually than what you can necessarily do with the time. So again, coming back to that being really intentional with where you spend your time and invest your time, right? And I think because of that, my perspective is shaped. It always is for all of us from our lived experiences with it. And I had worked with entrepreneurs in the the company that I was with before moving was an entrepreneurial company. It was right startup. It grew in years, but very much still startup mind. Before that, I was working with a small consulting firm. So had some experience with small business and working with entrepreneurs, but still never would have thought that would be part of my trajectory until what became clear for me was I the calling and this understanding of I'm really passionate about this. I don't know what I can do with it, but what if I just tell people this is what I'm really passionate about and see what happens, see who responds, see what kind of comes up and percolates. And so between 2015 and starting On Point, or in 2018, like market validation was what it was. I was doing also some marketing and some other tasks for another entrepreneurial business in the HR and talent space, because I knew what I knew here at Harriet was it was about people. I knew that much, but that's not an answer, right? So needing to still figure out, well, who do I actually want to help and support? How am I passionate and able to support? And then how do we actually do that in a sustainable, scalable way that generates impact over and over and over again, that creates kind of a change, right? In the narrative around the culture of work. So that was the root for me of, I knew I had this desire. I had no sweet clue what it was going to look like. And that did take time, right? I did, again, that this mentor helped, he sat with me, over about 2 years, right? And like we would have regular conversations, and he exposed me to parts of his world and network, which was entrepreneurs that had started companies from scratch and what that journey was like. I got involved with the Volta scene here in Halifax to, again, just kind of get a little bit of a foot in the door and go, okay, like, what does this look like? And what does this journey look like? Really, not the vision of it that I think we still see in media at times, that entrepreneurship is this cure-all and that it's for everybody. Yeah. It's not. Nothing is, though, right? We're all uniquely human, and we're all uniquely positioned to do something that nobody else can do, because none of us have the same lived experience, perspective, and or talents than anybody else on this planet has. So therefore, of course, it can't be the same experience for everybody. But for me, never would have envisioned entrepreneurship, let alone with a software product.
Right.
My background is not software in terms of not a developer. I've hired many developers, both in for software and hardware in previous roles. So I was familiar with it. But for me, product and software is a means of hitting the impact that I want to hit.
Right.
You just can't do this kind of scale of what I would like to be able to accomplish, of what I would like part of my legacy to be, without some kind of technology. It's just not possible, right? In the way that I would like to run a business and still have a life. We only have one life. I firmly believe that you really need to be intentional with how you spend your time. On Point is, it is my baby. It is never far from my thoughts, but it is not 100%. There are other things in life that need to continue to happen to feed, and they all work together in my own ecosystem. And so for anybody considering entrepreneurship, if my advice is still the same of go inward, understand who you are, what you're interested, passionate about, what cause or thing or change do you want to create in the world? What are you willing to do to make that happen or to contribute to that? And what are you willing not to give up? Or what are your non-negotiables? Like, I think that's so important.
So huge.
Right? Like, set those boundaries and do not waver, because the world will try to have you waver.
Yeah. I think the non-negotiables piece is so huge, because that's probably what got you to the place where you're unhappy right now. And so getting really clear on what those are. And it's been interesting for me also just watching women have conversations about the non-negotiables in their next opportunity, whatever that looks like, whether that's with a new employer or their existing one, or even just getting clear on what the path is going to look like, even with family, like having that conversation at home, because you're always going to face some trade-offs. And the more that you, I think, grow in responsibility and impact, the more of those choices you're going to have to make. And we are many things. Our job is a part of our identity, but it's not the only one part of us, but it takes up a big chunk. So being really clear about that is what gives, no makes way for yes. Gotta learn to say no in some places so you can say yes to some other things. Otherwise, you're saying yes to it all, which means you're probably getting overwhelmed and burnt out and leading to a whole slew of other issues.
Right. Not putting your best self out there. Right. And I think that's really, really key. I'll pick up on a thread there, Harriet, because I think it's very relevant for the time that we're in, as people are contemplating what's next in life overall, and career as part of that. We have the opportunity to work with a couple organizations who specifically are helping people re-enter the workforce, or transition into a different sector. And it is using mentorship as part of the toolkit, because you're rebuilding. So and trying to bring what you already know, so all of what you already know, while also understanding that you're putting yourself in a new environment that you do not have confidence in the same way of what you know, because it's new. And rebuilding that confidence and connection and context, and doing that in such a way that, again, it all connects to what is a possible next step in evolution. But using those opportunities to actually say, okay, you know what? There's so much out there. What's the space that I want to be in, right? And it all comes down to, again, coming right back to just the root of who am I? What do I want to do? What are the things that I'm willing to accommodate, bend on, flex on? Flex is a better word. Because you are actually in control, right? And I think that's kind of the root for me in terms of coming back to career ownership. As you mentioned, nobody else is going to do it for you. We have to do it for ourselves, but we don't have to do it alone. I think that's a really beautiful thing.
It is. And so, wow, so many takeaways that I'm having from this conversation. I'd like to leave people with some questions to think about. So is there a question that you want people to walk away thinking about, to help them do some of this work that you really feel is important, as they're contemplating, with their passion, their next step? Is there something that comes top of mind for you?
Sure. And maybe twofold.
Mhm.
I think for individuals that are listening and something resonated in terms of, oh yeah, that hit a chord,
Mhm.
or any kind of reaction in the gut, um, scour your network.
Mhm.
Who do you already know and have trust with that they could be your first person to confide in, to simply even just say, I'm starting to try to like, I want something else. I don't
Mhm.
know what it is, but I want something else. Because I think once you can take that first step, it does an amazing thing. It like just releases tension that we've been holding that we don't even know we're
Mhm.
holding.
Right.
um, so I think that is, and it doesn't need to be, it's just one step, right? One person, one step. The other side is if you are not necessarily that person, do you know somebody in your network, again, where there's trust, who maybe you've observed doesn't seem to be the same version of themselves anymore,
Mm.
or is showing up differently, or you've noticed maybe isn't as happy, again, as it relates to career in this conversation, that you could actually extend an olive branch, so to speak, and in a safe way, non-threatening, not about, hey, I've noticed A, B, or C, but hey, like, how's it going? Like,
Mhm.
can you just create or hold space for somebody in your network who may be at the start of that reflection, and open the door for them to then fill you in? Mentor or mentee, we both need to be that at all stages in our career. We have value to gain from both. At certain points in time, we're in one kind of hat and others were in the other. I think everybody listening to this call is well equipped and positioned to be either a mentor, formally, informally, use the label, don't use the label, but who can you support because you believe in that person and you want to help them achieve what they want to achieve. And or if you are that person who knows you're not happy where you are and you're looking for the next step or progression in your career, whatever that looks like for you, how can you access support and help? And one step, one person, one question. I think small steps lead to big leaps over time.
Mhm. Yeah, that is absolutely true. I'm walking away from this conversation thinking about a couple of things. I'm thinking about the difference between like containing energy and being isolated and feeling kind of alone, trying to figure it out on your own, having conversations with yourself versus what you've just shared, which felt like energy unleashing and, breathing space into something, which is the creative process, right? So, like creating something through that and the reciprocity and the energy exchange that comes from this back and forth relational component, which is so powerful just in and of itself.
Mhm.
And then also the piece that I'm taking away from this is, really circling back to how we started, which is, life is too short
Yeah.
to do something that you're not passionate about. And I think about like, what do you care deeply about? And who do you care deeply about? And if you could make a positive impact on the world with something that you could help with, what would you be interested in doing? Like, where do you want to make an impact and with whom? And if that's not what you're doing right now, then take a step, find a person, have a conversation. And so I want to thank you for taking the step to be here with us and having a conversation with all of us. And I'm hoping that anybody who's listening is walking away with some insight and maybe they're going to take an action as a result of this conversation and unleash some of that energy that they could be holding on to. So thank you so much for your gift of time and presence and wisdom, Chantal. It was lovely to have you here.
Truly my pleasure. So thank you for the opportunity, Harriet.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, thank you.